Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Nuggets News. Today we've got a very special guest, and that is Anneke Lucas, who's a survivor of these child trafficking networks. She's written this book about her journey and her healing. She was trafficked by the Rothschilds, Rockefellers, into the Royals, and all this stuff that we're going to be getting into today. So Anneke, welcome to the channel, and firstly, well done on your journey and speaking out.
Oh, thank you.
It's
It's a pleasure to
amazing.
be here.
It's just amazing that the truth and all the light that has been shined on this darkness for so long, and it's thanks to people like you that were the brave ones speaking up first that has made this all more acceptable. And it's just an amazing time to be alive. So, for those that aren't familiar with your story, do you want to maybe give them the short version, and then we'll get into all the details as we go through the podcast.
Yes, I'll be happy to do that. And I just want to say that people actually have been speaking out for forever. It's just that it's it's just very difficult for these stories to find, the spotlight because there was a survivor here in the United States in the 80s that was speaking out, Bryce Taylor, who gave great detail and published several books and was at the time on local news channels and everything. And that was then, there were a lot of people speaking out at the time, and that was then followed by an enormous backlash of what was then called the Satanic Panic here in the United States. And then the false memory movement came after that, and then just became like this whole like going back to basics and lying about the basics of dissociation in order to help brainwash people into believing that this could not be true.
Yes.
So there has been a lot of there's been a lot of people that have been speaking out, and for a long time. So I just have been public for 13 years. I am in my 60s, so I was just ready at that time. I was 49 when I started to speak out, and I just felt ready. And it took decades of healing to feel ready to speak because of the programming to not do that. And basically, I was not born into this network, as many survivors are. My mother, who was not mentally well, sold me into it and got paid to take me to places. So was active as my pimp, basically. And I was just this was just my around my sixth birthday, and that this started and immediately ended up in extreme situations that were at the time in Belgium. For the first 3 years, from 6 to 9, I was used either for blackmail purposes for the politician and the who got people in through secret societies and anyone who really wanted to climb, whether it was in government or politics or business, and mixing with the nobility also who were involved in this. And the politician in charge was just arranging everything, and children were used mostly for blackmail. So that's what I was used for. Or I was given to certain nobility, certain men from the nobility were extremely sadistic. And so, as what would be called a throwaway child, I would be given to one of these people that it was just accidental that I survived with those people, and then not everyone did. And um, that was really the first 3 years. I was taken back home. Of course, I was going to school. I was very dissociated, but I, was also kept out of school sometimes to be brought to one person's home, or you know. And so my mother had everything in her hands. So she lied to my stepfather, who then also didn't want to know. Um, and she kept up appearances anyway, as much as that's possible for someone who was just really not mentally well.
Yeah.
And and at age 9, I was given to an American billionaire who was in the country for the Bilderberg meeting of that year. I think a lot of events happened around that Bilderberg meeting, and
Mm.
this particular one, a ritual was organized by the Belgians in his honor. And so, in that ritual, one child was killed and completely by act of God, I ended up attracting the interest of this billionaire who then set out to turn me into his personal elite slave that would involve spying, and this is all on people in the network, on men and powerful men inside the network I would be spying on. And to attract those powerful men, I was going to be given a platform of a celebrity in France. And of course, this was the time that I sort of feel like I met the global group of, the most powerful people in this global network. And I was groomed, and I went into mind control training then specifically for this. I also went into what I can only call a celebrity training, and the whole year really I was prepped and also used. And then after that year, I rebelled, and then I got kicked out of that select group, and reprogrammed, heavily reprogrammed, and then thrown back to the Belgians, you could say. And then in that Belgian network, my book begins at this point when I was already rejected out of that inner circle back in Belgium, and where I spent the last year as the slave to a gangster, a very young gangster, who ended up rescuing me from that network at age 11.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think your story's one of the reasons it's so important is because it ties together so many aspects of what's going on. You've mentioned the celebrity sort of slave status, the royals, politicians, the blackmail with everything that's coming to light recently with Epstein, and that type of thing. And you've come forward and named names. So I believe that billionaire that you're talking about is David Rockefeller, and this was organized or approved by Evelyn Rothschilds at one of these Bilderberg kind of meetings. So yeah, do you want to maybe just talk about that a little bit more? Because people kind of hear about these big families that control the world and pull the strings, but you've kind of seen this firsthand, I guess.
Yes. So David Rockefeller was the special guest in Belgium. The Minister of National Defense, Paul van den Boeinans, who was the head, really the visible head of the network in Belgium. I think the royalty were the invisible head. But he came from a family of butchers, and he had himself started out as a butcher, so middle class, and he was not himself what I call believing Satanists. So even though these people did exactly the same things, they were not believers, as I call them, true believers, as I called it. And then they set up this ritual in his honor. And as I said, it was completely outside of my own willpower or anything. It had nothing to do with me that he took an interest in me. But when he did, my life changed completely, because at first I was a throwaway child, and now I was going to become an elite slave. And that meant then that I was going to belong to the network. And so for that, I was, this was in April, end of April of 1972. In July, I was flown on a private jet to the United States. I was actually flown to New York, JFK. I was driven off the tarmac, no border control or anything for me. I was convinced that I was going to be sacrificed because, of course, as a 9-year-old girl, I had no idea why I was being transported. And when I was picked up by a handler who put me in a hotel. So we walked into the Hilton Hotel by the airport, JFK Airport, and walked through a busy lobby, and I was put in a room. And while I was in that room, I was convinced that I was going to be, when I was going to be picked up, it was to go and be killed. And that same handler came to pick me up again after an hour or two, and then just brought me downstairs. There was a town car there, the back door. He opened the back door, and told me to get in. And there was David Rockefeller, who looked extremely happy to see me. So this drive up the Sawmill Parkway and from JFK Airport up north to Westchester, where his mansion was, I was feeling completely high because I had believed so strongly that I was going to be killed. And there I was received with open arms and a big smile, and I was just high on happiness, I guess.
Yeah.
And immediately he became a parental figure, because what followed I really didn't understand. But he was just testing me. He was putting me in the environment that he's used to in his mansion, where he was literally teaching me how to eat, and teaching me also the foods, the foie gras, for example. And I got to learn about these foods. He spoke French to me. He didn't realize that I understood English. So he spoke French to me. He liked speaking French. He was kind of happy to show off his French. And clearly he was extremely excited to be around this 9-year-old girl. That was his little project that he was going to turn into, a star.
Yeah.
And he was then looking for my specific qualities very naturally, in this sort of the way that you want to get children's talents out. He was put me in front of a painting. He had some paintings by Picasso that were, I'm sure, originals.
Yeah.
And then, he would show me the painting, and he would just ask me to speak about it. And I did. And as I did, he figured out I have an eye for art. And so I know that there wasn't a plan for that later, that this was going to be used when I was going to be part of the network, that as a star who was herself not an artist, I would, though, sponsor young artists. I would discover young artists and sponsor them and become their mentor, and then draw them into the network. That was the idea around my gift of being able to tell, good art and be able to speak about it, have that eye. And that was one little thing. There was a lot of sexual training there as well. Let's not, I was feeling very happy because I was used to being treated as a piece of dirt. Yeah. So he was very nice, and that made me very happy. I felt very special. I was seen more than ever before in my life. But there was also a lot of sexual training that was particularly what he was then doing was making. He did something, and it's very interesting because I know the Rockefellers funded this study. It's John Money. John Money was one person, and then there was somebody else who was funded by the Rockefellers, who wrote a very famous book, and that book contains a chart of children and the time it takes them, the age of the child, and the time it takes them to orgasm. Yeah. So we know that these tests were completely, pedophilic. Yeah. So he was doing that with me, and he was telling me to not, so when he first touched me down there, I immediately had a reaction. I had never really experienced that before. And then he was telling me not to hold in my orgasm. And so he would note down the time that it took me, and then it took longer and longer, and he was using shower head and things like that, and then noting down how long it took me. And he told me I should not, and I believe that this had to do with that nothing would be ultimately for my own pleasure, it would be for the man's pleasure. And he was also drugging me the entire time, giving me little pills and everything. That put me in a state where I was probably more sexual than, even though I was a sex slave. Yeah, I'm a child. But so yes, there were lots of things that he then brought me to his home in New York City, and again, there was in Westchester. I never saw any staff. And I spent several days there in his bedroom, which I've recognized on a photo. There were certain elements of the posts of the bed and, the layout of the room that I'd always remembered. And so it was quite shocking to see it in a photo. But I spent quite a lot of time in that bedroom when he was doing other things during the day. I was also taken to his home in New York. There was a man and a woman staff there who seemed to be completely okay. It's almost as if they were maybe also mind control slaves. Um, they were completely okay with everything. And then this is also where he would take me out and, really got off on the fact that nobody would ever guess, and nobody ever asked. And he did introduce me to his staff as his niece from Paris, if that makes any sense, that there would be, Rockefellers in Paris. I don't even know. But yeah, and yes, and so he spoke French with me. And so he took me shopping for clothing, and it was always that he could then also teach me something. So when we went shopping for clothing, he bought me this little summer dress, and then I could feel the cotton, which was crispy. And then that was really what he was teaching me, to feel good quality fibers and so forth. So there was always this little teaching element, and he was so happy to do that. That was clear. I also spent a week with a family near DC in that time, because I was in the States for a whole month. And I guess for 1 week he had other things to do. I was with a family. He dropped me off. There were two a town. He always drove in a town car, and there was a limo as well. I was being dropped off there. This family was very happy to accommodate him. And so I stayed in what seemed like quite a happy family. I'm sure they were Satanists, but they were very happy to have me there. And I got to play with other children and go swimming and things like that.
Yeah.
And then we went to Maine. And on the way to Maine, on his sailing yacht, and we did some other things as well. And there's some other things that, I have vague memories of other things that were done that we did. But then we ended up sailing, and we had this beautiful sailing yacht, Helmsley sailing yacht. And then we docked at someone's home, and that turned out to be Evelyn the Rothschild, who was younger than he was. And it was clear we were there. We arrived. It was still daytime. They sat and talked. I overheard them. And then Rothschild, I didn't know anyone's name, to be clear, asked me to sit with him in a salon separately without David there. And he figured out that I spoke English, that I understood English, and he just addressed me in English. And this was an important moment for me, because I thought I was very good at hiding, either what I knew or what I thought. Yeah. And not only did he address me in English, knowing that I understood what they were saying, but he also pointed to something that I had been thinking. And for me, in that moment, I felt more seen than ever. So I felt very happy. And while it seemed a very relaxed atmosphere in a beautiful salon and very peaceful and everything, and there's something about having that much power that is just a little bit otherworldly. Yeah. But he basically invited me to give my will to become part of the family. And he also described what my future would look like. And there was a lot of good in it. And it sounded really great when he described it, the fame and very specific descriptions of the place where I would live in Paris, and the house I would have on the Côte d'Azur, and the yacht, and the best car, and the adoration and the worshipping. I would be in all magazines. I would be respected by everyone. And he started with the respect, which is what he'd seen that was my weakness. I wanted to be respected. And he figured that out before we even sat down, and then offered that there's a temptation. Yeah. And then, of course, at that meeting, I did give my will, not really understanding what that entailed. And then I spent a little more time, then we stayed the night there. I slept in my own bed. I was so happy.
Yeah.
He was not interested sexually, clearly, and I felt so seen, and
Yeah.
really, I think on a developmental level, I was receiving something that I needed, and being seen in certain ways. And for me, if someone would read my thought and it would be not completely in correspondence with what was wanted of me, I always felt I risked my life. And here, this man, this Rothschild, had done the opposite. He had seen it and he had accepted it and he had spoken to it
Yeah.
positively. So, so after we left the following day and spent a little bit of time in his in Rockefeller's home in Seal Harbor in Maine, and then I think from there, I'm not 100% sure, but I think from there I was flown back to Europe, and then I was first taken to some kind of a lab in Switzerland, and then from there, and there was some programming involved with that as well. And then I was ultimately driven by the Belgian, head of the network, Paul van den Boeynants, to Heidelberg, and there dropped off at this what looked like a beautiful villa on the outside that really had a large basement, and that was a facility for mind control.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll get into. I want to get into that mind control and facilities and that stuff. But just rewinding a little bit, you've kind of touched on Satanism, which is obviously key to a lot of this and what these people believe. But it seems that there's almost two factions, as you say, people that weren't into the Satan side. And is it right to sort of describe that as the people that are just there for the money and the greed and the kind of psychopathic nature, but then they're not into that really dark ritual occult beliefs? Or what are is that right, the two sort of factions? And what have you learned about all that?
Yeah, so in Belgium, and so Paul van den Boeynants, he definitely did not believe that, but I do, I did not come across a lot of royals, although I did in Belgium. And I think the royals are the Satanists because that's all about the bloodlines and that's where
Yeah.
that all matters. So,
Yeah.
and definitely the globalists were Satanists. And David Rockefeller was what I call a true believer. And of course, I was invited into the family, which means the mafia, which means the Satanic club. That's what I was giving my will to.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that, but that's where I have to give my will. And that is, by the way, it was specific because he asked me if I wanted to become part of the family, and I said yes. And of course, I had to obey. I had to promise I was going to obey. And I said yes, and I was asked specifically to say I will. So I had to say the words I will. I was 9 years old, but I found out later that this is a right, and these children that are going to get important roles in the network, they have to be full willing participants and have to give their will 5 times. And so Rothschild was really the representative there of Satan, that I had no idea.
Yeah.
And I did certainly see that at the rituals, and there, I was present then with David Rockefeller at some very large rituals where there were a lot of celebrities present. And there I could see that, yes, that some were definitely completely into it and believing it, and then going really far and allowing, basically opening, inviting demons into their own body mind system in order to commit the heinous crimes that they commit for those rituals as sacrifices. So that definitely happened. And then they would even show off, like that would be real extremely gross. Those were the more powerful people, the people whose face we see everywhere a little bit, like the ones that were most into it, that were the worst. These are the people that get the most from the satanic cult or from Satan, or they get the most fame. It's like the people that we've seen around for decades that just stay young, and they're just always the media only writes positive pieces about them, and they always seem to come back, and they never seem to, you know, like, how does somebody have a career, an acting career of 50 years and stay huge the entire time,
Yeah.
That you have to be a very willing participant, an enthusiastic participant. And then there were other celebrities that maybe were not the biggest celebrities, but they were there. And I could tell anyway, that they were maybe not, at some point, somebody can give their will in a moment of weakness, especially if they're, when they're adults. Because as a child, luckily, I was never implicated after the age of 11. So it's very difficult, to come after me with materials. They don't exist. I was a child. I was forced to do these things. So when you're an adult and you've been put in a compromising situation, and this may be a choice in the moment of weakness, or a choice, where you need the fame and the, or when you want the career, when you need this and you need that, and you may be young or you may be older, but whatever, it's in a weak moment. It doesn't mean that you would be on board 100%, but it does mean that you now belong. And sometimes I don't think people that are in this group and are not fully committed have to be at every ritual at all. Not at all.
Yeah.
I think that may be very rare even. But you do have to give your will, and you do have to participate.
Yeah. So when you even described about being transported and being fearful about that you might have been killed, is that because you'd already seen similar things happen at rituals? And when you say rituals, is this like the eyes wide shut robes and that type of setup at the worst of the worst events?
Yeah, like Eyes Wide Shut gives a very stylized picture of, what was really messy and gross and,
Yeah.
and just, and they always leave out the children, of course. That's every movie that you see that it takes an element, whether, of course, the Hunger Games has the children, and the children die in the Hunger Games. But most movies, spy movies and all of that, they just leave out the children and the child abuse. But yes, it does look like that. Sometimes it depends. It could be in big, it can, very often for me, it was in big castles. Sometimes they're masked balls. Sometimes it's just an orgy without masks. The grossest things absolutely happen there. The sickest fantasies are lived out there. And everything, it can be provided for those people, and everything is also filmed.
Yes.
And in the beginning, though, when somebody is being lulled into this, I was often in a room with a handler waiting for those people to leave that didn't know this, that were considered not ready for the children. And then in the beginning, it was pretty tame. In Belgium, they would just bring in a few. There wouldn't be it would be maybe an orgy, but it would be rather tame orgy compared to some others. When there's, the Belgian orgies were, well, there was definitely a lot of sex and everything. More adults. There were, in my case, there were just a few children. And so then people could take the child up, and then they were filmed.
Yeah.
And then I knew where the camera was, so I had to position them also.
Yeah. Okay.
And sometimes I was also introduced to people that was supposedly their first time with a child. And then I had to then make that man feel comfortable about what they were doing. But when you have those large orgies, yes, I had witnessed child murder. I had. And in fact, the ritual that was staged for David Rockefeller around the Bilderberg meeting. I mean, I never was at the Bilderberg meeting in Knokke, Zoet. I was at wherever I was. It wasn't right there. It was just around that event. The boy that was killed there, that was sacrificed, was somebody that I was very, it was very endearing. He was very endearing as he was a little slow. And so, and he was also 2 years younger than me. And I very, very much wanted to protect him.
Yeah.
And so I had seen him slaughtered, and it was absolutely brutal. And I was even forced to watch. So, so yes, I was convinced. I didn't know. I had never been on a jet plane before. I didn't know what was going to happen. I just thought the only reason I could be taken away from here. Meanwhile, of course, what I realized, the first thing that happened after David Rockefeller took an interest in me, which was sort of a whole thing apart from me, is that my blood was drawn. And then the only thing I remember is that whatever happened, or if this was later, I don't know, but he was happy with the results. And it wasn't just the blood, the physical blood, but obviously, I figured out later, they must have gone and asked my mother who my biological father was, whom I didn't know, and found out from his bloodline.
Yeah.
Which there was, nobility down in that bloodline. Yeah. So that's probably the result that he got, that he liked. And then he was gone, and I didn't see, and then for several months, nothing happened until I was flown to the United States. So I had no idea where I was going, who I was going to be supposedly seeing.
Yeah.
And I was treated, meanwhile, very badly in Belgium. So.
Yeah. When you talk about these elite sort of sex parties, orgies and stuff, are you familiar with people talking about, because I know you've touched on Pierre Trudeau, and people saying that, some of these royals, their fathers don't look anything like them, but they look like other people that are kind of in this elite club. So do you think there's actually a lot of truth to that when they get together, everyone's just having sex with everyone, whatever, and there's a lot of these royals that are kind of just all mixing bloodlines? As long as you're in the bloodline, they don't really care, and that's why we have all these offspring that look so similar to other rich, famous, important people in the cult.
Yes, I don't really know about that specifically because, I speak from my experience. I don't think it's very useful for me to give any opinions or anything. So, but what I saw was that there was a huge difference once I was considered one of them. That's to say, bloodline, that makes all the difference. And then, because that was the first requirement for me to even have any role in the network. Otherwise, I would just be used and killed. Yeah. And then your life has no value. So once you're in, and they figured out then that I was then your life has value. You're still a slave, and you still have to obey them. In fact, for me, that was awful, because that having to obey but at the same time being made to feel that I was so special, felt very uncomfortable after I was treated like dirt the whole time, and I had my own opinion freely. And I just secretly looked down on all these men. I thought they were all losers. But now, they were making me special, and they were, and I was so lucky, supposedly. So now I felt real pressure because I knew that I was supposed to feel grateful, and I wanted to be grateful, but I felt more pressure than gratitude. So the parties, those rituals, I'll say, where Pierre Trudeau was, it seemed like a week-long ritual, or there were several rituals in that week leading up to April 30th. So he was one of the people there, and so everything happens there. There's a ritual there, and then a big rituals there with a great big fire, and the most horrific things happening there. And raping, I was now working. That's to say, I wasn't being raped. I was now having sex, because that was after the mind control. I was in the persona that was being created in the mind control. I was a future star. I also had my first performance during that week. That was, to part of the induction, part of my induction into the cult. And so I was sleeping with all these men, and then at the same time reporting on their sexual preferences or their weaknesses to David Rockefeller, who wanted that information clearly from me. Yeah. So he wanted to have some kind of leverage through my reports. So that reporter part in me, as I was programmed I have this reporter part, so I got a lot of memories back from the reporter part.
Yeah. Just going back to the rituals a little bit, we've had other guests and survivors on the show, and they've spoken about this as well. And you mentioned the kind of the demonic side of it and the possession, and some of these other survivors have mentioned actually seeing apparitions appear when they do these kind of rituals. But what's the kind of most far out stuff that, because this, people just don't learn about this at school or in the media or anything, but what are some of the things that you saw that were just otherworldly? Because people mention, eyes turning black or faces changing or apparitions appearing, but did you see much or any of that at these rituals over the years?
Well, isn't the ritual enough far out enough?
Yeah.
Everything that I'm talking about is so incredibly far out that most people even have trouble believing what I'm saying. But no, I did not see apparitions. I did not see anything other. The only thing I did see was, yes, people's faces and bodies would just transform. Not that they would be different, not that their face would be a different face, but the expressions were not really human anymore.
Okay.
And their expressions would change so much, and their body would go into such a state that they would be completely unrecognizable and different from when someone goes in a different part, which, of course, that happens all the time. People just switch. Perpetrators switch more than victims, by the way.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
But this would be, you could see the possession, that you could see that whatever creature is, I guess, lower astral beings,
yes,
that have no bodies and that need physical bodies in order to feel the sensations of sex and the sensation of murder.
Yeah.
And so, yes, well, what I saw, though, what I witnessed was absolutely beyond horrific. So definitely far out.
Yeah, absolutely. But do you want to get into some of the MK Ultra and the programming and these different techniques? As you say, some people are used for sending messages, others are used for sex slave, blackmail. We hear about these underground labs or facilities, and the whole MK Ultra program's, pretty well known now. But yeah, how does all that kind of work, and what have you seen in that realm?
Yeah, well, that was a very intense, month. I mean, I was sent 1 month to that place in Germany, in Heidelberg. And then the rest of that year, though, so this was in August of 1972. And then the rest of that year and the following year until April of 73. So the rituals that I'm talking about, where all these celebrities were and where I sang and had a performance, that was in April of 1973, when I was just 10 years old. So my 9th year was really dedicated to that mind control. It was first 4 weeks in that facility. And then in several weekends, there would be, parts of the programming, or I would be deployed. And so for me, it wasn't MK Ultra particularly. I think it was more German. I mean, MK Ultra, I think, is a combination of the German and American experiments and, mind control that was done in either country before the war. And then I do know that there were also some of these paperclip doctors that were also in Australia.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
There's a lot of activity in Australia, that's for sure. In the Commonwealth, all the Commonwealth countries seem to be particularly active. And So the mind control training was, whew, yeah, so it is torture-based mind control. So whatever I learned it by being put in an extremely traumatized or near-death state. And it wasn't to create parts, but the drugs that I was given by David Rockefeller, even at his home and then throughout that mind control training, were all, everything was geared towards creating one persona that would be this celebrity,
Yeah.
that would be a singer actress, and in France. That was where I'm from, Belgium, but this family of mine was French, so they were going to make me a star in France. And then from that platform, of course, I would be able to seduce all these very powerful men who, if you don't have any platform, they wouldn't even see you. So
Yeah.
it would be famous, then you can attract presidents and so forth.
Yeah.
So in the mind control, I had so many near death, I was put in near death states so many times. So there was a German Dr. Hans Hamsen who was a Nazi. He was a eugenicist as well, that he was known for. Even at that time, he was known for his eugenics. He was also funded by the Rockefeller Foundation. He was also the head of Pro Familia, which is the Planned Parenthood of Germany.
Yeah.
And he was active at that time. He was in his 70s. And he was, his specialty and what he loved to do the most was, he was completely sadistic, and his favorite thing was to create a near-death state in me, in the victim, and do the programming that way. And he just loved his unique specialty was that he could leave you in a near-death state extremely long, so that you would be clinically dead for quite a while, and then he would get you back right before it was too late. That was his specialty. That's what he loved to do the most.
Yeah, I've heard other survivors talk about this, where they were put in like ice water, like and ways to prolong that kind of state. It's just there seems to be such a fascination with breaking the mind, and you've sort of touched on the astral world and consciousness. And do you think ultimately that's what these people are aware of that the general public isn't? It's kind of like our spiritual nature. And the CIA talk about these, these programs and psychic abilities and astral projection. And so all these kind of secret societies and these intelligence agencies are very aware of this. And there's the public documents that this stuff's all very real. But I think the general public is really kept in the dark about our spiritual nature and how our minds and all that really works. Do you think that that is really key to everything that is going on?
No, I don't think it's key, but I wouldn't call it spiritual, because I think that's what they're lacking, is real spirituality. But what they do is the occult, which is the same as spirituality. That is to say, to use the finer energies and to read them, to read the energies, and to open up these psychic gifts through trauma, for sure.
Yeah.
To use them for dark purposes, though, and that's why it's occult.
Yes.
So yes, my mind was open completely, and I was even in a flotation tank, not a normal flotation tank where you can relax. This was, yes, you do relax, but the water was so deep that if I would fall asleep or panic, I would drown. So different type of flotation tank that I was in for a very long time. But for example, when you don't have weight, it does open up your psyche. And of course, when you, as I had to do, go far beyond the state of sleep, so far beyond, you just, yes, weightlessness plus sleep, overcoming sleepiness, you do get into these states where you're much more psychic. And then I was also given tasks from I was in the dark, but I was given tasks from outside of the tank, what I had to do. And it had to do with going into some, yes, in my case, it was for picking up on what was, I was given a photograph of a former chancellor in Germany. And he was in the network, but I was going to be spying on him. And so, yes, from that photograph, I had to tune in with that person. And then I was reporting what I was feeling and sensing and smelling and seeing regarding him, his activities and everything. Yeah. and then I had to also put thoughts in his head. And that is done. And that is maybe an interesting factor when we're talking about mass mind control. So what I was taught to do, so I had to guess his weakness. And that was that he was on the way out, but he didn't know why. Because even though he was a pedophile, he didn't realize that he was actually not a psychopath, and he was kind of too good, and he didn't realize that you had to be more ruthless really to do better. Yeah. And he could feel that he was not a chancellor anymore. That's the most important political post in Germany. He was on his way out. He was in his 70s, and he felt like he was on the decline, but also inside the network. And then as he was worried that he was losing, status, not only in the world, but also in the network, and not knowing why in the network, I was presented to him as his ticket back in, because I was going to be this famous child. And so he could, and he also liked 9 years old. That was kind of his age for him as a pedophile. So then I was going to be used, I was going to be, so he could have me. And what I had to then do, and this was before I met him in person, he was somewhere in Germany and I was in Heidelberg in a tank. I had to get into his, so I had been picking up his thoughts and I'd been reporting on them. And I'd been picking up on other things as well. Like when he's washing, or, the smell of the soap, things like that. And then I had to get into so not only listen to his thoughts, but then inject thoughts that were given to me. And those thoughts was mostly I had to create urgency. And this is what mind control is. You go to someone's weakness, their blind spot, which is their weakness, which is really their vulnerability, or you could say it's their unhealed trauma. Yes. That creates a blind spot where there is fear. You go to someone's fear, and then you create urgency. And then with that urgency, then you put the commands in. So once that urgency was created, that is to say, you just hurry him up, like you got to do this quickly or else it's too late for you. Yeah. So I was putting these thoughts, he thinks he's thinking his own thoughts, but in fact, I'm putting them in his head. Yeah. And that worked, by the way. That worked. When I met him, he was very much in love.
I mean, as you're describing all this, a couple of things come to mind. Firstly, that Hollywood kind of have to hide the truth in plain sight. And what you've just described is, the tank, Inception, the idea of planting thoughts and memories in people's heads, remote viewing. Stranger Things is a really popular show at the moment that was all about the Montauk Project and float tanks and that type of thing. So, it's just incredible to hear you talk about all this stuff. And
yeah, I haven't seen any of these shows, I haven't seen anything that, I really haven't seen a lot of movies because mostly they're too triggering or something. Yeah. So I don't know anything that you're referring to, but yes, I hear that a lot. And I do think that a lot of movies take elements of the mind control. They leave out the children.
Yeah. No, I agree. I barely watch any TV or movies these days because when you're awake to all this, it's just hard to find them entertaining or whatever. But yeah,
and you see that you're being mocked. Like yes. At 2 minutes in, and then they're already mocking you. And like, no, thank you. I don't need to watch this.
Do you want to get into maybe the mass societal aspect of the mind control? Because as you said something that was just really profound before about how they use fear as that way in to manipulate people, and obviously everything the media and Hollywood politicians do is to try and keep everyone fearful and worried about the next thing. And now through television programming, as we know, it's almost like people are under a spell once you wake up to everything that's going on around you. So do you agree with that, that everyone is kind of in this state of fear and mind control, and they're not free and aware of their own thoughts versus what's been sort of programmed into them?
Yeah, probably a lot less than than the people who want to control us would like us to believe.
Yeah.
We're probably a lot less brainwashed ultimately, because in my experience, people are just getting more loving and sweeter and nicer and more aware everywhere you go, everywhere I go. Compared to the 70s, the 60s and 70s when I was growing up, like this is a different world. This is a much brighter world. And even though a lot of people may still be brainwashed about that, I think the discrepancy between what politicians say they are doing for us and what is actually happening is becoming so great that it's pretty easy to see. If I speak for young audiences, they're always right there with me because it's too obvious. And but of course, what we have to understand is that we need to heal ourselves, and first you have to have the humility to admit that you were mind control trained too, and I was too. I was, in as much as that I was not healed, I was also picking up a lot of things and believing them, and I had to go through that myself. So my healing process is also the awakening process, and I can't stress enough how important it is for each person to heal your trauma, because the trauma is fear of death. And fear of death, or fear in general, it's not only trauma that creates fear. You can be vulnerable through other things as well, but you have to have awareness of your fears. And it's, either you learn to overcome your fears without bypass, really facing them and getting over them. But often there is some trauma hidden underneath fears, because trauma is fear of death. And the younger you are, the more vulnerable you are. So I think we're not really quite aware of how the guidelines of the psychopaths that are in charge, that when I was growing up, Dr. Spock type childhood is so traumatizing for a child that they would be completely traumatized from being left to lie in the crib without having human contact, and not even knowing that they exist while they're being abandoned in that crib, while the parents mean completely well. So first we have to accept that we were mind controlled, that this has been going on for a very long time, and it's very invasive, and we're all affected by it because we've all watched TV. It's not just TV, it's social media, just as strong now. You can't escape it. Everywhere you look, there's mind control. So what we are made to believe, and all the talking heads everywhere, we don't know what's happening. We can only go out in the world ourselves and then just observe what is real and what is not real. And in this day and age, there's so much focus that's very much coming from this group, of course, the division, to create division between groups, so to create downward projection from one group to another, just to make sure that we don't look at them. That's really the reason. So I think it's really important that each of us says, I'll look at myself. Like when you're being invited to mock others, for example, when you're being invited to mock a group, that's mind control. That is not normal. And you would normally not want to be one of the bullies, I don't think, So you have to be aware. And when you go to your own trauma and that fear of death that created that, it creates a blind spot because you are going to be dissociating in that moment, even as an infant.
Yes.
There's parts that are being created, and everyone has parts. So there's a part that is still in that dark room, abandoned in the crib, that doesn't know if they're ever going to come back. Mom and dad are never, you just don't know. That part is still there, that is feeling completely abandoned and doesn't know if it's going to live. And then there's other parts that are formed to try to cope with the situation. So we just really want to go to our original trauma and heal that, because the only way that we can be mind controlled is if we have blind spots, which is the direct result of trauma that we have not healed. So the more aware we are of ourselves, the more we can prevent. Because the truth is, I don't really get so scared. I mean, and in fact, even as a child, there were, in the mind control, there was something. And so I don't know if this was drug induced or if this was real. But I was put in a near-death experience, and this was part of the creation of this persona, which was obviously going to be a very beautiful woman that was going to contribute to the pedophile agenda. As a starlet in France, as a child, I would already contribute to the pedophile agenda, of course, being beyond my years, flirtatious and this and that with men, so that it's sort of giving carte blanche to all men to be desiring a young girl. And then as a woman, I would continue to promote, the pedophile agenda by whatever it was, by promoting, this idea that boys should be so lucky, to be with a woman, with a beautiful woman, that would be their first, lots of stuff there to promote. Once you get a platform, you have to be able to promote their agenda. That's why so many people are controlled. And so in this particular part of the training, I was told, you're going to descend to the depths of hell. And we don't know if you're never going to be able to leave the depths of hell. Yeah. So what happened to me is, I was lying flat. I was actually on some sort of horrible deathbed in this basement. But I felt myself physically sinking as I was laying flat. And what I saw were demons around me. And I just kept sinking in. So there were these extremely scary faces and big dragon mouths and everything. And the thing was that I was scared, of course. But at a certain point, when it really got over the top, I flatlined, not physically, but emotionally. It didn't touch me anymore. So I didn't get that scared. I didn't get, it was an issue that I never got scared as I should. I never got that scared. I never got the horror screams kind of thing. Yeah. That didn't happen. I was just, I'm out.
Yeah.
And but there was this layer of demons that I sunk as I was sinking. It was as if there was this layer that was just coming at me all the time. And then I was underneath that layer. And the layer seemed like it was 2 miles thick. And I was under it. And that, in that place of nothingness, then I would be completely isolated and no one could ever reach me, because I would have this part that was locked into the bottom of hell, that you have 2 miles of demons above you that you don't want to go through to go back. And I woke up, and I was even told that this was to create the unattainability in the beautiful woman. That there's men want to save a beautiful woman, don't they? And they see a beautiful woman, they want to there's something sad in her eyes, and then men are very drawn to that, and they want to go and rescue her, and then they confuse their sexual attraction with their heroic savior that wants to go and save this woman.
Yes.
And so all men are in. So this was one part of that something that happened to me there, and another. So that was, to create that unattainability. And then the other part was that, um, I was told that if you survive this every time, if you survive this, you're going to come out very different. And then if you survive this, you're going to come out and all men are going to fall in love with you, because you're going to, it was it was very specific that I should not call. I called on my mother, and I was told, no, your mother means nothing. It's not your mother. You're going to go to men. So I was put in a near-death state, and my psyche had to reach out to men, because the men would come, the men would save me. And so this was in Germany, and there were like men in the vicinity that I was going to their psyche, help, save me psychically. But that's who I then believed was going to save me, save my life. I needed men to live instead of a mother, to live. And so, yes, I mean, I think I touched on about 200, psychically. Again, I was lying on this, strapped down to this deathbed with all these needles and all these electrodes, all over my body. It was extreme.
Yeah.
But and then that was, that I would at the same time call on men and want them to rescue me, but at the other hand, I would be unattainable. So, and this does create a sort of a certain hypnotism. And there were several parts that even long into my healing, I could just see that psychically there were still parts that were doing things, and I just noticed the result of it. And I myself was not aware. So it's just integration of all of these parts that I'm now, as memories continue to sort of unfold and just clarify not only what happened to me, but also how they work.
Yeah. Do you want to get into some of your healing journey more? Because as you're describing all this stuff, I think you're a big believer in like yoga and these other sort of consciousness practice. Like, is it just the talk therapy, or some people these days talk about psychedelics and the power to help heal and make people comfortable to talk about their deep traumas and bring that stuff to the surface? Or that spiritual aspect and all that healing journey, how's that been for you, and what have you learnt from all that?
Yeah, so I want to definitely distinguish spirituality from occultism. And anything that deals with subtler energies, with the subtle energies and the invisible, that is for selfish or even demonic purposes, is occultism. And spirituality is when you may, like praying, you can send energy, good energy to people, and you can send things, you can do good things as well, like prayer. But you can also, for me, everything is spiritual. So there is nothing that isn't spiritual. I certainly wouldn't. Yeah, it's a great spiritual journey, in that the healing also, I mean, there's this great wounded ego, as I survived this as a young adult. I'm this great wounded ego, and I had this programming, but then I was reprogrammed. And as I told you, I was kicked out when I disobeyed. So then I was reprogrammed. So this programming that I just described to you is called no fail program, that I'm going to go and do this, and I'm going to always succeed, and I'm not going to have any competition. Even if there is competition, I'm not thinking of, I'm just no fail, celebrity. And then I was reprogrammed to fail. That would be discarded, so that I would be dying young, of drug addiction and all of that, and prostitution, and just die young.
Yeah.
And then when I was finally rescued by the insider, by the gangster, he then put a new program in that went against the discard program that I then followed very carefully. That really saved my life in terms of not falling into prostitution or drugs, which was the first things he said.
Yeah.
So he didn't say anything about healing, and anybody in the network doesn't understand healing at all, and a lot of people in the world really don't understand healing at all.
Yeah.
There's real magic to it, It is the awakening of the self.
Yes.
Of the true self, and it is really a spiritual journey towards the true self, which obviously is not physical.
Yes. I completely agree. I do a bit of healing work with people as well, and it's been such a journey for me learning all this different stuff, and learning about the darkness is, I think, one of the things that brings people towards the light, or starts on their own healing journey. So yeah, this is an amazing conversation. But do you want to maybe touch on when you said you kind of left or got kicked out? And I think from what I've read, were you forced to pledge allegiance to Satan, but you refused to do so? Or, how does that tie in? And when you were, how did you kind of get out of all this? Yeah.
Well, it wasn't that dramatic. But, well, when it was clear what I was going to be made to do, to belong, I subtly, very subtly, so I was actually being tested, because for the role that I was being given, I had to be a willing participant. Because, listen, you can be a victim in the network and be coerced the entire time, even in your adult life. But for the role that I was going to get, with the power that I was being given, and the visibility that I was being given, the platform that I was being given, I had to be a perfect mouthpiece for the network. And if I was not willing, not fully willing, not from my own free will, part of it, that's to say, how much do I want the fame? Because really, that was it. The respect, really, it was flattery.
Yeah.
And it wasn't real respect. And I came across a situation where I was supposed to be respected all the time, which meant that I was being flattered all the time. I even had a celebrity training, where I was being surrounded by just fans, or people that were an entourage, that were just, flattering me the entire time. And so I was supposed to be used to flattery, but that's not respect, of course. And I was put in a situation of a jealous woman, a famous singer, who abused me horribly, and but really real abuse, and no respect. It wasn't like I'm having sex with a man and he is so happy to have sex with me. That was what it was at that time, even though there's no real respect there either. But they were sort of admiring me even then, right?
Yeah.
And this woman, from her jealousy, was extremely mean, and so they were extremely disrespectful, she and her husband. And, well, that did it for me. I'm like, well, if that's still gonna happen, then no thanks, because all these horrors that are happening, unless you are a psychopath, where you're completely cut off, from your inner morality and sense of right and wrong, these things are horrific. You dissociate. I mean, of course we were dissociated in the mind control, and we were dissociated from all the rapes that have already been part of my life. But there is like, wow, dissociation is extreme. And as I said, perpetrators also dissociate, but still you have to give your will. And when they couldn't even respect me, I'm like, well, no then. And so I had been trained well enough to know that it was no point in refusing or openly disobeying. That, unfortunately, these are very cruel methods, so there's no way to not do it. And in my case, had been made clear right away that if I refuse, it's going to be that much worse for the victim. So then you do what you're told. But I was doing it, but I wasn't really wanting to do it at all.
Yeah.
It was coerced. And so that was ultimately the test. And there was a final test, which was rather subtle. It was, it was just it was David Rockefeller who asked me a question, but he was giving me to understand that I should not answer it because I had been told in a different situation that I should not speak about this. So I had to obey not him, but the network.
Yeah.
And I didn't care. I wanted to tell him anyway. It was about that abuse by that woman. And when I did, he then was forced to also, he had to destroy me. And then I was reprogrammed. Again, it's always torture based, but there the torture was extremely gross and sick. And just to make me feel worthless and make me feel that I don't deserve anything, and to reverse that celebrity training.
Yeah. Do you want to get into some of the maybe Australian connection stuff, because you've touched on a lot of the European royalty and politicians and that type of thing, even the eugenics and the Nazism on Operation Paperclip, but Australia had Operation Matchbox. I'm not sure if you've heard of this, where that was our version of the same thing, where they brought them into the big universities, the psychiatry clinics, all that type of stuff in Australia after World War II. So how much do you know, or did you ever come across Australian leaders, or what do you know about the Australia connection?
I never knew anybody's name except sometimes their first name. So I would have to go check who were the leaders at that time, because I was really there for a short while.
Yeah.
In that short while, the number of famous, like I was going to be a singer. So in that week, there were just a lot of celebrities there, actors, singers. But I never looked up any Australian. I don't remember the Australian accent, hearing the Australian accent at all. I wouldn't have recognized it either.
Yeah.
But I'd have to look at who the leaders were at the time.
Yeah.
And then see if that resonates to begin with. But no.
No, that's okay.
I just know that because I work with survivors, that there's so many survivors from Australia and also from New Zealand, and that anybody from the Commonwealth seems to have, there's a lot of activity there. And that's really what I know. I know several survivors from Australia. I've heard, things that they've told me that are also similar, that it seems that all of them went to England at some point. All of them were taken to England.
Yeah.
It seems like the royals were very active. But I personally, again, I didn't come across any Australians that I remember that I know.
Yeah, no, that's okay. When you talk about the Commonwealth countries, do you think that this is a combination of like the royalty and the bloodlines that we've spoken about? And then there's the other aspect of it, that people come through these universities and are maybe groomed into these secret societies, like, your George Bushes and Skull and Bones. And then the business side of it, like Freemasonry and the Catholic Church. One thing we've been talking about is that the very highest levels of all these, it seems to become very different to what everyone else that, is just a normal Freemason. And in that club, it kind of starts to get really dark. And then it's when you have to pledge allegiance or do a dark ritual. And then you get into these higher realms of the real dark and join the club kind of thing. So would you agree with all that?
Absolutely, yes. And I think it is a worldwide network. So yes, I think it works the same everywhere. That, I think there's actually, is it an Australian who won The Voice or something? And then he was immediately catapulted to the 33rd degree in the Masons. And he has this 5.5 hour video out where he talks about, where he just reveals all the secrets of the Masons and how it works, because he became a celebrity from The Voice. And then he got in, and then he had an accident, a car accident, and then he gave his life to God, and then he's been, speaking out. But that's, that's somebody who would have been invited in as an adult. And he said that the Grand Master of his lodge never reached the 33rd degree. So this is something that was very clear, that the people that are supposedly in the know, which is like in the know about the darkness, really, there's in Hollywood, for example, there's a catchphrase that's "I'll do anything," and that's signaling that you'll do anything means really anything in Satanism, anything to make it. And that's what, the network is looking for, people who have no qualms, who will do anything, literally, to belong to that elitist club. So if you have no self-esteem, you're much more likely to do anything to get status, because it replaces self-esteem. Power and money, status, all these things of the world, they give you a false sense of self-esteem that the stronger children don't go along. Like most survivors that I work with were born into this, and still they didn't go along. I was put in as a 5-year-old, 6-year-old girl several times. There was this awareness in me that this is wrong and I don't want to be part of it. And several times I was certain that I was going to be killed if I was going to do this or that. And I did it anyway because I didn't care. Because I didn't want to do that, or I didn't want to. So, because I had a sense of self, and that comes from spirit. That's your connection to spirit gives you your sense of self. That is, that that you are not just this body. But if you don't have that connection, so you have these people that are, yes, it works like that, and it works through these secret societies. But when you look at that more closely, it is so ridiculous. It is so ridiculous what is done in the low. Okay, good-hearted people doing good in the world up to the 32nd degree, but why are you laying down and bowing down and going naked and whatever, and all the humiliating things that you do to get into good graces of the Grand Master? Why do you promise that they can tear out your limbs and they can cut off your head if you'll ever say anything about what goes on in the lodge, if all you do is sit around and talk? And that's, yes, there's a lodge. There's also the church. A large group of the nobles were part of Opus Dei. There's, of course, the Vatican itself. So there's all these groups, these different groups, where at the lower levels, nobody knows. And those are the foot soldiers that keep the good name and the reputation intact. And at the very top are the sickest people of all, that are also the weakest people of all, that are completely emotionally sick and never developed past year 1. So they're complete narcissists. And we believe in the mantle of power that they have put on themselves, and that they all help each other to create this illusion that these are authority figures that are worthy of our admiration and our, elevation, when in fact they're the loser. They are losers. And we, the people, obviously, we're so much stronger. So this is what we're waiting for, is that tilt of consciousness. Because the more of us that speak out, the more that happens on the other side to take us back into the darkness. But the darkness is consciousness. So it's what we have in our subconscious, what lives there from our unresolved trauma and everything.
Yeah.
That's the darkness. When we bring things into conscious awareness, that's the light. So conscious awareness is the light. And what I see with my eyes, when I look at a person, I say, that's a pedophile. He likes little girls. He likes little boys. He drinks blood. If I see that on somebody, that means that everybody should be able to see that.
Yeah, knowledge is power, and that's why we do interviews like this. And because people can't know what they don't know, and it's almost too far out for people to believe. But when you break it down and explain it to them and show the evidence, as more survivors are doing, and connecting all the dots, then this is really an amazing time to be alive, as there is a consciousness shift, I believe. But let's maybe rewind a bit to the 1970s, 1990s with the satanic panic that was labeled by the media. And it's almost like they got told, do not talk about this stuff anymore. And now it's all starting to come out again. And I think that's also a product of decentralized and independent media. The fact that anyone can jump on TikTok or Instagram and make a video that goes viral about these things. And so it's harder and harder for these people that had control over the media, and and the police and the judges, and to keep this information secret. So
They can still have control over the talking heads on social media and on YouTube.
absolutely. But does that give you hope how much these messages are getting out compared to back in the day when that satanic panic kind of got covered up and buried?
Yes, these are amazing times, and in the 13 years that I've been speaking out, it's changed tremendously. It's beautiful. But in the 70s, I'm sure that one of the reasons that I was kept alive ultimately was because, I mean, I barely made it. But okay, that's another story. That's in my book. But there was no question that anybody would go and talk about this.
Yeah.
Like in the 70s, I don't think a lot of people were speaking out about this. So then it was in the 80s that people started coming out. I didn't realize it because I was going into therapy in the 80s, but I was not at all aware of any of this. I wasn't really on following the news back then anyway, and it was mostly on local news more. And I read The Courage to Heal, which does also bring in ritual abuse, but I didn't resonate in either, or when I saw an American survivor, I didn't resonate either. So there's a particular resonance with some things that the Dutroux case, which was a big deal in Belgium, that I resonated with completely, because those were actually the same perpetrators. That was the network that was brought into focus in 96. So, well, you see that the mainstream media, well, I know that David Rockefeller, I believe there's this a clip where he's thanking the New York Times. It's very simple. Yeah. The media, there's always somebody. So it's like with the secret societies. The media is the same. I have some friends that are investigative journalists. So, they would do an investigation, but then the last minute, people would be on board, but the last minute, if it's a big channel, there's somebody that controls it, that then pulls it away. Then it doesn't get published. And so there's always there's a level of control that it doesn't take 50 people in one station. It takes 3 or 1 even to make sure that, if it's the person at the top, then they have the veto power. So there's that, and that's a real issue with mainstream media. And these are people that were trying to go via the mainstream media to bring the credibility to these serious investigations. And then now we have, what in 2020, I was approached by a lawyer to use the new Child Victims Act that was passed here in New York to sue the Rockefeller estate for child sexual abuse, David Rockefeller. And I was open to it because I thought maybe that's a safe way to bring that name out into the open. So the lawyer, so the thing is that this lawyer who was really sincere about this didn't have a license to practice in New York, so we had to get a New York lawyer on board who, when we found him, well, he reached out to the families, and so we now had contact with the Rockefeller family. They knew that there was potentially going to be a lawsuit in which he was going to be named. And there were other people that were on board that were willing to go ahead, the other survivors of David Rockefeller. I've met quite a few survivors of David Rockefeller over the years. So, so there was this potential for this lawsuit. And I have to say, there was nothing happening then. There was here the QAnon that had started, this whole idea that Trump was this big hero and that, that he was leading us in secret. And so very strange anyway, not resonating at all with any of that. Although there was a lot of information there that I think was very tricky, that a lot of people said, oh, this information is real. And of course, a lot of information is real. There's so much information that's real that we get all the time. Except if information is being brought to you in secret, that's a very network type of way to bring information out.
Yeah.
And it's all happening behind the scenes. And I felt that the main message of this QAnon group was, don't you do anything. Just sit behind your computer screen.
Trust the plan.
Change. Trust the plan. The authorities are doing this behind the scenes, and everything's happening behind the scenes. And these people are already great. Anyway, it became really crazy. But anyway, this is when SRA got linked to QAnon. And so QAnon now picked up this issue. And so suddenly this became anybody who says anything of this kind. And then there were QAnon people that were picking up my story. They were completely twisting everything, no interest in details. And it was just, they were running with it. You felt that cultish, like, we believe this, we believe we're making a change, and then save the children. And then this huge division was created between the QAnons and the Trumpers and SRA, which was also this crazy far right-wing Nazi conspiracy theory now. Worse than the false memory syndrome.
Yeah.
And anybody who has a head on their shoulders, the good liberals. So that was so crazy when that happened, that I know that by the time that we would have been in court, I tell you, the jury would have been affected by this. And they would have been brainwashed to believe that this isn't real.
Yeah.
And in the complaint that we sent, the lawyer had insisted to put in an aspect that I really had not wanted to put in, but he insisted, because I told him, he put it in, was that this ritual where I met David Rockefeller, they took blood from the victim that was drunk. So the thing that started going around, and it started going around particularly in the yoga world. So there was this yoga influencer that was saying, people, don't be so naive as to believe that the elites go around killing children and then drinking their blood. That's ridiculous. This came through the yoga world. So now all the people that previously had followed me and believed me, now we're saying, don't believe this crazy stuff from these crazy right-wing Nazis who are
Yeah.
And the division that was created there, I think the work that went into that, in terms of, really well done. I have to say, hat off to the network for creating that division. And once again, the between the Satanic Panic, they always have funny names, right?
Yeah.
They always have to give funny, catchy names.
Yeah.
To ridicule things. So from Satanic Panic to, they also go to the lowest common denominator, because when you go to false memory, it's like dissociation was never questioned. There's dissociative identity disorder that was never questioned, or it used to be called multiple personality disorder. that now became questioned. You can't have memories. And so all survivors of incest and sexual abuse that had ever, recovered memories were under attack by this
Yeah.
very shaky science that is based on a very small study that proved absolutely nothing. So, but the purpose of it, and I think this was missed by a lot of people, was about removing the rumors of Satanism. And I did a presentation on this because I thought this is to go that low, and they always go very low. So when I get attacked, it's like she's a liar, she's a fantasist, oh, anything. Like, what's clear is that people who attack me have never really read my book. They've never really listened to the video that they're commenting on. That's clear. So it goes to the lowest common denominator, but this can be done on such a great scale that the pedophiles that jumped to the defense of the false memory, right? All those famous people, the scholars, the psychologists, all the ones that are on board, they all jumped in there. The media, everybody jumped in there. This became a huge phenomenon to the point that today, people that study psychology, young people that study psychology, well, the textbook is written by one of these, clearly a pedophile, who is saying that anyone who comes with the story of recovering a memory, it's probably false.
Yeah.
That's what people that go and study psychology learn in school today.
Yeah. There's so much effort put into discrediting, as you say, or making it seem too far out. But there's just, people like Ted Gunderson and Kathy O'Brien, Jay Parker, yourself, there is just so much evidence from intelligent people. I think Ted Gunderson's probably one of the former head of FBI, like really credentialed people that spent decades trying to get this truth out that this is absolutely real. But interesting you touched on the Q stuff, and because they did bring a lot of important issues to light, as you say, but then now I think it's almost backfired because Trump's gone from I'm going to release the Epstein list on day one to saying there's no such thing as the Epstein list. So it's only kind of brought more people, and he's losing his supporter base, and people are now realizing, well, hold on, if I was believing Trump and now I don't believe either side, then they're kind of seeing through the veil that there is another layer, I believe, to all of this. So I think that's...
Yes, there's the information. There's so much information out there that's real that is given to you by talking heads that are part of the network. So ultimately, we only have our own discernment. I don't mind that information comes out that is real, but we have to ultimately know, we have to trust our own intuition about these things, and that is done by the healing work.
So where do you think we're at with, Prince Andrew being stripped and stepping down? The Epstein stuff is still kind of in the news, and people more than ever, I think, want the truth, and they see that the FBI and whatever are covering up these things that are happening. So do you think the truth is only ever going to come from the people? Or do you think that as we get younger politicians in, this changing structure of the media, are you hopeful that within your lifetime that we're going to see that shift where most people kind of wake up and realize what's been going on, do that healing work? And I think the world can change very quickly in a number of years once all this stuff gets out there.
Well, all the stuff is already out there. So, the thing is that the stuff is already out there, but there's still a lot of programming to not believe survivors and to not look at survivors, to not go find them. All the stuff is out there. All the names have already been named.
Yeah.
There's no need to focus on the Epstein list because all the people that are on the Epstein list have already been named by survivors all over the place.
Yes.
So what's the thing about the names also is like, what are you going to do? Like, what is this? Epstein's been thrown under the bus. Weinstein was thrown under the bus. I guess he's going to get out soon. He's going to get out in a year now. That's been arranged. Yeah. Ghislaine Maxwell, is in a cushy prison. Who's going to be thrown under the bus? Yeah. No, if we give our power away, we have to change. We can't be, what is it called? Keyboard warriors. We can't be keyboard warriors. We have to change ourselves. We have to become more aware of our own self the names have been named. As I said, Bryce Taylor, Thanks for the Memories.
Yeah.
It's a book that names everybody. She names all the perpetrators at that time. She names Ronald Reagan. She describes in detail her encounters as a sex slave with the then Gerald Ford, the then president. I mean, there's so many people from both sides, of course. It's not just one side, from the Republicans and the Democrats that have been named. So many that have been named. So shouldn't the question be rather, what can we do that justice can be served? Because obviously these people have been named. The names are out there. See, I often get put in a position where I get to, people somehow feel that it's justified to make me responsible for any crimes committed by the perpetrators that I don't name. So to that degree, do we not respect survivors or understand anything about this issue? And names, it's not about the names. Ultimately, the names are there. I've named a lot of people.
Yeah. Yeah, as you say, it's all out there. I should rephrase it as in get it into the mainstream consciousness for that reason, so that people stop listening to these people, whether it's Bill Gates or these corrupt prime ministers and presidents, or these corporations of CEOs and all this type of stuff. When people take back their own power and stop listening to the TV and these people, as you say, I think that's how.
But also the social media, it's everywhere. So where do we go? Eventually, we have to go inside ourselves. And again, as the spiritual journey, it's away from ego, but also away from matter.
Material.
To know yes, away from the material, not that you have to be poor, but just that you're not attached to, you don't, that I think the biggest problem, and I wrote that in my book, in my introduction, is that these psychopaths that are trying to rule the world, they are putting their values out there. They have put their own values out there. And to the degree that we don't have self-esteem and we don't have faith in that we are much more than this physical body, and that, that the power of spirit is greater than anything, and that all of this is part of spirit anyway, and it's part of our own journey towards truth again.
Yeah.
That all of that is a, part of our personal journey away from matter to the truth of who we truly are. And within that, there's a role somewhere. We have a role that we may be given to play or not. But it really is for each person to follow that path, that inner path, really.
Yes, I agree.
Of knowing the self is when we are not afraid anymore. This cannot happen anymore.
Yeah. I think last question, touching on kind of these evil people that are trying to completely take over control of the world. Some other survivors have spoken about...
I'm sorry. I didn't finish. That's what I was lost my train of thought. Excuse me.
You're right.
That really the values that they are putting out in the world, it is to the degree that we follow those values, like here in the United States, this idea of ambition before anything. And if it's business, it's all right. You don't have to be human anymore. And that greed is okay. All these things, all these values that are being promoted and that we're supposed to look up to. We have to look up to people that are very wealthy, even though we have no idea how they really made their wealth. So that we're being invited all the time to take on those same values and to go to ego all the time from these models that are really poor models when it comes down to it. So that's where, again, we have to look at ourselves, that we don't get stuck. If I'm greedy, if I find myself greedy and I'm justifying it because it's all right, because it comes from the top down to say, well, it's just business, it's not personal, it's business.
Yeah.
Then to be able to look at that, and with enough self-love, hopefully, to just go into, well, I can look at myself. I don't have to feel so ashamed that I can't look at it, but I can just look at it with a lot of self-acceptance and a lot of self-love, and then see maybe where I feel deprived, because
Yeah.
to want too much has something to do with a sense of deprivation. And then when you look at these people and their greed, just think of the deprivation that's behind that. Their sense of deprivation, that spiritual deprivation that
Yes.
is behind that.
It's such an important point about how society is in general has kind of become evil without realizing it, because people are starting to realize the royals and the Vatican have got all this wealth, and if they were, if the Vatican was in touch with God, they wouldn't be letting people starve while they sit on golden thrones. But then
Exactly.
down to the societal level, if I'm out in nature on a bushwalk and I see someone that doesn't have shelter or clothing or whatever, you're going to help them out. But then once you get into the matrix and you're living in these cities, it just almost numbs people. And, walking past homeless or hungry every day, and we don't even stop to think for 2 seconds about looking after each other, because it's kind of the system that has people. So, and this kind of ties into the last question I want to talk about with the New World Order and these evil people that are trying to completely control everything. Other survivors have spoken about, I think it was Jay Parker back in the 90s was talking about how they're going to use, fluoride and chemtrails, pharmaceuticals, all the tactics they're going to use to kind of dumb people down. It gets back to this war on consciousness and spirituality. But did you ever come across and hear the elites talking about these global plans and how they're going to control the masses and much of that side of things? Or
Yes, no. I mean, I do EEC and I do lots of things and cleansing, and I'm vegan, and there's a lot of things that I do to try to, ward off as much as possible and stay clean and all of that. So I have this awareness of it, and then I do my, whatever I can. But when I was young, what I really heard about was the pedophile agenda. So that was talked about around me because I was going to be used for that. And so that's what I do remember. That was, and obviously the pedophile agenda has resulted in the sexualization and vulgarization of everything, which has made such headway, really, from making porn so easily available and accessible, and that most young people now have discovered sex through porn, which is vicious and often involves trafficking, and then porn becomes its own. Everybody's being invited into sex addiction, and that's definitely a plan.
yeah,
And sex addicts make better slaves. That's actually the idea of the network itself, that we get pedophiles that can be more easily blackmailed.
yeah,
And then the problem is that they're all pedophiles.
yeah,
Although the highest one, Rothschild, was not, but he was obviously needing all these pedophiles to keep his and then to just generalize that and make everybody like them. Really, I mean, they think of us as vulgar. They think of us like that superiority. Once you're bloodline, the difference between how I was treated before before they knew I was bloodline and after, it's night and day. That once I was one of them, suddenly I belong, I get invited, I'm special, and I'm being invited also to look down on the masses that are vulgar. My mother, who was not bloodline, I had to just deny her because she was vulgar, and I was told very specifically what to do with my mother. She was going to stay in Belgium. I was going to live in France, and that I was just going to bring her out for certain occasions, and then, could look really good, but basically just have handlers around her so that she doesn't say anything stupid, send her a dress, organize everything. I mean, everything was my life was prepared in great detail. There was a lot of resources put into that persona that I was going to be. But yeah, the vulgar and the profane, right? The vulgar and so that we are being looked down upon like that so profoundly, and that from that place, what they're doing is trying to put everything in us that they do all the time.
yes,
We're the vulgar ones, but it's not that easy. Although when you turn on any kind of screen, it's really hard to avoid the sexualization of everything. And I have seen in fashion how women's fashion is like, what now we're not wearing pants anymore.
Yeah. I just want to be clear for people at home. When you say the pedophile agenda, you mean the normalization and hypersexualization and degradation of society, and they're starting to try and use...
Ultimately normalize pedophilia, yes.
Yeah, and they're starting to use terms like minor attracted people and added into the...
Those things.
Yes.
Yeah, those things. That it's not so taboo anymore. Now we have to feel sorry for those pedophiles that are not active or something. You know, we have to feel so sorry for them because they need help. And there was a play in New York by a Tony Award winning writer that was asking the question, when is enough punishment enough? When is punishment enough? Because it centers pedophiles that have already finished their sentence, and there's a victim that comes to confront one of them. I could just imagine how bad that victim was made to look.
And as you say, it's like the top psychologists that's kind of, or the journals and that whole industry will start to write these articles about, how it's just a mental health thing, and we need
exactly.
It's all the same, yeah.
And we can add it now to the P. We can add the P to the LGBTQIA.
Yes.
That the whole question of adding the P to, well, that hasn't happened yet, but there is that whole issue of consent. That I was never treated as a child. So for these people, consent is not an issue. And again, they're psychopaths. They have no clue about love. They don't know anything about healing. They know everything, in science-wise. They know everything about psychology. They know everything about the psychology of trauma. They know everything about trauma responses, the instinctive trauma responses, and how to use those to become, for mind control. They know everything about that, and that's quite a science. I mean, I was impressed. But they know nothing about love. They know nothing about what real strength is about.
Yeah.
They know they're parasites. They have to steal the light, the spiritual light of children to feel alive. They live in the negative spaces of their own unresolved trauma, where, their life is an empty front cover that is completely false, that we're looking at, when we see them on TV or when we see them on the screen. But they come to life in the darkness, in the shadows. And ultimately, you have to understand that a child that is being abused, that is always going to be in some secret way. And that very often it comes with this idea that, there's the trauma of losing your innocence, and now feeling that if this is someone, that is an authority figure, most likely, child abuse, that now you cannot be lovable as you are, but you can only be lovable as a sex object. And you're being given the message that this is where the fun is. This is the fun. This is where the fun is to be had, in secret. And the free state, as you cannot fight, you cannot flee, you can go in free state. That in that free state, it's like the free state is like in that island of negatives, of the horror of the trauma, where you have the fear of death from the overwhelm of this you have the creepiness, you have your own sense of that this is dirty and wrong. And then in all of that, and in the pain potentially, in all of that, in the free state, you're likely to have a sexual reaction. And that sexual reaction then becomes the one light point, the one positive in that island of negatives that you're then invited to cling to and say, this is it.
Yeah.
And so there's the beginning of sex addiction. There's the beginning of living in the darkness, coming to life in secret, in the reverse way, in secret. And that your whole life would be completely depressive emptiness if you didn't do these things, if you didn't feel like you could come to life by dumping your load on a new victim, which is really what they do.
Yeah, satanic inversion, as you say. When we spoke about the bloodlines and how excited and how different they treat you, Do you know much about, have you heard much about, did you experience what they believe? Do they believe they're descended from, these ancient gods all the way from the royals to Egypt, or do you go down that rabbit hole much?
No, I mean, I didn't hear that when I was in the network. I didn't really hear about that. I just saw that I was being treated very differently
Yeah.
and that it's all indeed about royal blood,
Okay.
the blue blood, the blue blood. That's
Yeah.
what it is.
Yeah.
And literally, this is very minuscule. This is like hundreds of years ago in my family line, my father's line,
Yeah.
hundreds of years ago. They were okay with that.
Yeah. That's
That
fascinating.
was enough.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Well, Anneke, this has been amazing. Is there any topics that you feel we haven't touched on today that you really want people at home to understand, or what? Anything else you want to shed some light on before we wrap up?
Well, maybe it's clear that what I know from my healing and from the specificity of the healing journey is, the psychological understanding of these issues. And I think that my book really, gives really not only the dark raw facts, but very much the understanding and the insights that I received through the healing journey. And so I would like to say that my book is a good resource and available in Australia on Amazon. And yeah, and then any other interviews like that. I really enjoy the way you asked questions and let me talk.
No, I've put the links to Anneke's website and book and socials down below. But no, I'm just so grateful for your time and well done. It's just, the victims like yourself that are coming forward are just angels, I believe. Like, for what you've gone through to shed some light on everything and bring awareness to all this, it is truly amazing. So keep up the amazing work.
Thank you.
Cheers, guys.